Again from D-School Afrika here at the University of Cape Town. And today's focus around the circular economy is going to be on fashion or textile as well as tourism, both very important sectors, not only to this region of South Africa, but indeed the whole country. Some would argue the whole continent. I have once again a fantastic panel of guests who come from government, from the civil society space, from corporations and private sector, as well as an international insight, of course, who will be joining us live from the Netherlands. We're looking forward to the conversations for today. Once again, the Design Festival is made possible by the generosity and kindness of the mission of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and they've been part of this partnership now for the last, I want to say we've been having the conversation for 20 years, but they've been part of the partnership for many, many years of those 20 years. And of course, the Craft and Design Institute that has been spearheading the conversation for 20 years now. Once again, my name is Afrika Malana, and it's my joy and pleasure to be your host for this afternoon. This event, of course, for 2023 has been made possible with the generosity of time and expertise by the City of Cape Town, GreenCape, who are doing a lot of wonderful space in the circular economy, particularly where waste and waste management is concerned. The African Circular Economy Network, and if you missed our conversation yesterday, Katarina from the network gave a wonderful synopsis and reflection on what the work they do across multiple countries on the continent. And of course, they've been assisting us with many of the workshops. Circular South Africa have also been a very important partner for us. Without them, the thinking behind this year's not only Design Festival that concludes today, but also the previous creative exchange dialogues that happened over 2 months, it really has been with their expertise and kindness that we've been able to do all of this. Today, we will follow up this formal section, of course, with 2 workshops and masterclasses that are focusing on tourism on the one, as well as the fashion textile sector on the other. But that is going to be for the delight of those who are joining us here at D-School Afrika and not where you are, wherever you might find yourself in South Africa right now. As always, we start though with reflections from Helene Rekkes, who is the Consul General for the Kingdom of the Netherlands for here in Cape Town, and Erika Elk, the Group CEO for the Craft and Design Institute. Helene, I know you've done a lot of sort of engagement in this space in previous postings. But I was absolutely inspired yesterday following our conversation on circular economy and how we can apply in a South African context, but also how we can apply it from a waste and waste management point of view. What were some of your key takeaways?
Thank you very much, and thank you again for hosting us today, the UCT, and thank you for everybody who is here today. I was inspired yesterday, and I want to thank the panel, the panelists, and I know some of them are here, for giving us such good information and such inspiring words about what is happening here. And if you allow me, I have 2 takeaways from yesterday, and I start with the litter bug that came up at a certain point, because I have good hope that youth is actually quite aware of the importance of circular economy. At least if I can speak for my own country in the Netherlands, the younger generation is very much aware. And rather than ownership, a lot of the younger generation sees a lot of the products that they're using more as services. They don't want to own a car, they want to have transport services. Or either use a car, use shared cars or shared bicycles or Uber, of course, rather than owning products and the appliances, and the example came up as a washing machine. They prefer the service to be using that. So I see, at least in my country, the youth actually picking up on the topic of circular economy. But also the idea of seeing the economy as services rather than just a linear product production. I think that's another takeaway from yesterday, that going forward, and especially in the tourism and textile branch, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today. I think those notions are very applicable and important.
And Erica, the reflections shared by Helen there are very similar, perhaps not to the same impact in a South African context, right? Where we know a lot of young people who are participating in what is called the gig economy, who are happy to live in micro units because every product and service they consume, as Helen said, is actually a service that is offered by somebody else, as opposed to I need to own 25 different pots to be able to roast some meat.
Sorry, excuse my voice. But I think absolutely, in a way where my mind was going, sorry.
Here's a glass of water.
Henry, don't use this again. Where's the potential for job creation? If you think about skills, I think we thought about jobs in terms of making product. But I think the same applies if you're thinking about a service-based economy, as well as the idea of reuse, refill, repair. There is huge potential in rethinking the way our systems work for job creation, for skills development, for creating micro businesses, as you say, in a sort of micro context of people actually servicing and supporting each other.
And I thought an issue that was brought to the fore quite strongly yesterday is that when we think of the circular economy, it's not just about saving the climate, which many people tend to focus on, but all panelists saying how is it impacting on society? Because if you live in Khayelitsha and your primary concern is around addressing issues of hunger, for example, the last thing you're going to think about is how am I, in my everyday living, actually contributing towards the circular economy and therefore saving the climate. And yet, as we saw yesterday, there probably are, that people in peri-urban and rural places are in fact by nature already contributing to the system. Didn't that strike you yesterday as well?
Yes, two things were said that are very true. It's a lot of already is being done, but perhaps subconsciously. And there's also the situation of leapfrogging especially in the digital sphere, where South Africa is just because some steps have been passed already has a fantastic basis to jump into circularity even faster. I think there is one thing, and that came out also with a gentleman from the Western Cape government. When you just look at the public sector to take the lead, there's always the budgetary issues. And what is so important, and the lady from the Netherlands will also be able to attest to that, it's also private sector initiative that will help bring this along.
And of course, for that to, I suppose, experience maximum benefit, there needs to be a regulatory framework that realizes that. You said earlier that you are so looking forward to today's conversation. Why? What are you looking forward to the most about our conversation today?
Because I think both in tourism, but definitely in textile, I have seen that it can work. I have actually, there's such good examples where things are already done and implemented and show fantastic results. So it gives us the practical and the concrete that we were talking about yesterday in those two sectors.
Yeah, and that's certainly what I'm going to be looking for again today. What are those practical applications of this concept? And more importantly, what can I do in my sphere of influence to actually practice it? Erica, what are you looking forward to today?
The same. But I wanted to just add takeaways from yesterday, which were actually, I think the big thing for us is around information and around our behavior change. So when you think about tourism and fashion, I think those become really important because we can drive some of the change through our behavior. But the other big takeout that I got from yesterday, I can't remember who said it, was to ask more questions.
Yeah.
And I think same, tourism, fashion, ask more questions. But I think if we can take that also away from the 2 days of conversation that every time we do something that is related to our consumption and our behavior, just ask more questions about the product, where it came from, how it was made, how it could be done differently.
It was Kirsten from GreenCape talking about how certain plastic products will claim that they are recyclable to a certain extent, and actually when you do the investigation, you find that that claim is not quite the truth. Thank you very much, ladies. I'll chat to you again, of course, at the end of the session this morning to reflect on not only what they would have heard today, but more importantly, point a way forward. Before I introduce you to my panel of guests who are making their way onto the stage now, let me tell you about a wonderful opportunity that has been offered by D-School Africa. They'd like to invite you to attend a complimentary course. It happens on the 14th of September right here at the University of Cape Town. To start at 5 p.m. And the school will give you what's called the Design Thinking Dash. What they'll do is offer a fast, fun, concise introductory course to design thinking. There'll be a team of coaches who will take you through the design thinking process over a 2-hour period, and hopefully you will be inspired to consider this as a way of addressing and coming up with solutions to some of our challenges. Those who are joining us here, there is a register that Natasha put up your hand. We'll move around, and if you'd like to sign up for that course, we'll get your contact details. If you are following this via the stream, just email us and then we'll share the link with you. And if you are in Cape Town, of course, you are most welcome. Now, to shine the spotlight on fashion and textile, as well as tourism, we have from the Western Cape government, Rashid Tofu, who is the Deputy Director General in the Department of Economic Development and Tourism, with a mandate of creating jobs in the Western Cape economy. Next to him is Henry Matais, who is a Senior Manager responsible for social impact in the food ecosystem, head at the V&A Waterfront. An entrepreneur and creative director at Lani Rani is Shaimra Amudli, who, by the way, you are the best dressed. I mean, no offense to anyone else. Gentlemen, you did your best, but really, really amazing. Shaimra Amudli, of course, will be speaking to issues of fashion and textile. We have Dr. Jayashila Rajput, who's the founder and CEO of Toma Now, which stands for Tomorrow Matters Now. It's a green economy value chain specialist innovating and advising leading companies and industry bodies and NGOs to develop a viable and robust green economy solution. And hers is really a holistic look and reflection on what is possible when one does apply principle of circular economy. And then joining us from the Netherlands is Shirley Skyvens. She's the owner of the 5th generation of a family-owned business, Skyvens Corporate Fashion, in a part of the Netherlands I will not even attempt to pronounce, because is it Hilvarenbeek? Or something similar like that. And she's been involved in sustainable development for a number of years, since 2005. And we'll introduce you to her in a moment. Thank you very much. Lovely to have you all here. Rashid, are you ready? I'm good. Good. Lovely to have you all here. We heard from both Helene and Erica that these are two sectors, one which are important to the region, not only Cape Town, but the province, and one would argue the whole of South Africa, and clearly two sectors that have a wonderful opportunity to be explored in as far as circular economy is concerned. What does sustainable tourism and fashion mean in a current context for South Africa, do you think?
Thanks, Afrika. I think for me, the first step is to understand that both tourism or fashion or textile, as the CG said, is really a value chain. It's an economy. It isn't a single point. And so, for example, tourism stretches from construction, investment, transport. It's not just what some people sometimes see it as the hotels and the sort of pretty stuff. Similarly with fashion, it's nice to start talking about it as a textile industry, all the way from the growing of the cotton. So first of all, for me, circularity and sustainability is understanding that it's a value chain. And then really importantly for a country like South Africa, but also our global understanding of sustainability has to extend to climate, the green issues, to the economic issues. The numbers, the black and white stuff, are people in the value chain owning part of that value chain and not just being exploited or used in a small way. And then lastly, what I call the brown issues, which is the social issues. So it's green issues, economic issues, and social issues. Are all of those aspects taken into account when you look at the life cycle of the tourism product or the fashion product? But to give you a real example of that, I was recently in Zanzibar, which was lovely in the middle of our winter, and the example of not sustainable fashion or tourism was arriving in a place, paying for a 5-star resort, but everything before or outside of that 5-star resort gate is just terrible. Terrible infrastructure, what seems like no investment in roads. The products that people are selling are imported Chinese goods or very badly curated products. And I thought about Erica and the work you've done here, the transformative work you've done to our tourism product or our craft product in South Africa is you go to the waterfront, you can pick up products that could sit on any stage, or the kind of fashion that South Africans are doing could be goes straight onto the runways of the world. And that's because we've brought an element of design and creativity into the products right across the value chain. So not sustainable tourism is when you arrive at a place and dollars are being put into tourism, but it's not flowing through into any of the other aspects. And I think I'm not the fashion expert here, but you could probably make a similar comment of what that would mean from a fashion point of view.
And do we have examples in Cape Town, in the Western Cape, where the value chain does extend to General Joe Blogg, who's sitting in a community in an impoverished part of the city or the province?
I think it does. I mean, South Africa actually was one of the first signatories to the global sort of sustainable tourism charters. So there's always been an emphasis. I think we have the benefit of certain government policies like preferential procurement or empowering through BEE some small businesses. So people always see the sort of bad side of that, but the good side of that is if you don't emphasize that or legislate that, you could easily be a tourism operator and just simply import your products or use the usual, your supplier that you're used to using. But if you're deliberate about the economic impact or the social impact that your product procurement makes, you start to develop products throughout the economy. And so Cape Town and South Africa has seen an amazing development of tourism product, both. So it doesn't mean you have to take a tourist into a township to experience community's involvement in tourism. It's the fact that when I'm in the Table Bay Hotel, are there products or services that were created by people somewhere in the value chain? So is the food you're eating coming from local farmers, or did you procure the soap or the towels from locally produced people? I think that's more important than this kind of superficial view that extending tourism's value chain is taking a tourist on a bus to a township. That's one way of doing it, is to bring the township, people to the township, but you also can bring people in impoverished communities, as you said, into the tourism value chain. And that might be, I think Henry will touch on that, that's bringing people right into where the world's, Africa's #1 tourism destination, which is the waterfront. How do you bring our people from communities far flung and have them be present inside those tourism products?
And I suppose, Henry, the best example of that is Maker's Landing, because it is one repurposing an old, disused part of the silo, bringing in people from all sorts of communities across the region, taking them through a training program for developing of product and experience, and then selling it not only to Cape Townians and South Africans, but most importantly, those tourists coming off those cruise boats.
Yeah, absolutely, Afrika. And I must say, I'm very conscious that we're sitting in a time and place where that's probably one of the biggest challenges is the spatial planning of our city and what those business owners are facing in getting to that market opportunity that exists at the waterfront. But I'm going to build on from from what Rashik said around really understanding that product and service. And if we as a precinct really sort of dig deep into the value chain that supports each one of those products and services, whether it's Maker's Landing as a retail destination or an incubator of food businesses, whether it's the Watershed as a market access point for African craft and design, or whether it's Joy from Africa to the World, which is one of our marketing campaigns around the procurement of festive season decor. There's a value chain that supports all of that. And how does that value chain get access to market? How do they get to that market opportunity? What sort of skills development does that facilitate as well? Now, if I take a step back and look at the system that enabled this sort of 10 years ago. The traditional approach for particularly the private sector was philanthropic. It was, installing LED lights to circumvent some of the energy consumption challenges. It didn't really take a deep dive into sort of what we do on a day-to-day basis. What our product and our service is, us as an organization, we develop buildings. We have retail outlets. We consume energy on a massive scale. What is the value chain that supports each one of those products and services? And once we really sort of took a deep dive in understanding that value chain that Rashid speaks to, we could really go back and re-engineer. Particularly, I love that we're sitting in the D school today and use a human-centered design approach to understand each one of the stakeholders along that value chain and how we leverage what we have, which is really on the consumption end of things, how there's 24 million people that visit the precinct every year, the 200,000 cruise visitors that arrive in Cape Town, how that market can really stimulate the demand side. That's what's really happening throughout the value chain. That's when we could have a really catalytic impact on building a more circular approach to our product and our service as well.
At which point then do you bring the communities that you're wishing to impact on, from particularly empowering those communities and individuals, at which point do you bring them into the design of the process? Because one of the things that came up quite strongly yesterday was how there'll be people sitting with a bird's eye view and then thinking, well, this is how it's going to work optimally, and then designing it, and then when you start implementing it, you realize actually this is not optimal, it's not working, because there already exists an organic design that has been through necessity sometimes created. And instead of just plugging and pointing, you go, come on guys, let's imagine this together. Because remember, the objective of the V&A Waterfront is to deliver to shareholders, right? I mean, that's ultimately your job. You need to deliver to shareholders. If you're going to bring in these other elements, how do you bring in the community that you're hoping to impact on into the early stages of the design process?
I think at the outset, it's critical to understand that we don't operate in a vacuum. The success of a neighborhood such as the V&A Waterfront is totally dependent on the success of its community, its suppliers, the ecosystem that not only exists within that neighborhood, but the ecosystem that supports, that travels, the jobs that's created there on a day-to-day basis. You're not going to achieve any of this without the recognition that there is certain trade-offs that you're going to make. One such trade-off is shareholder value. But the traditional thinking has always been that value for society and value for the environment comes at the cost of value for the shareholder. We work on the principle of shared value, that doesn't come at the cost of it, can come together with value for society and the environment. Now, I think to answer your question specifically around where in that process you incorporate your broader stakeholder base, there's a system that's been created. Pre-industrial, we consumed in a very sustainable manner, subsistence farming, etc. Industrialization, particularly in the global north, the colonization of Africa and the global south, created an environment where these global patterns created a really unsustainable level of consumption in developing economies. And all of that led to a status quo that we're dealing with, particularly in a post-apartheid South Africa, a status quo of challenges in transport, infrastructure, massive social degradation over the last 20 years. And for us to really sort of reconceptualize what value we provide to the city, to the province, we needed to really sort of understand that system that we operate and bring a variety of stakeholders in to really reconceptualize what value we are not only bringing to our shareholders, but to this society, to this community, and to the environment that sustains an operation like the Vienna waterfront. And I think critically back to the design of programs such as Joy from Africa to World, I think even back to the design of our business strategy, we had stakeholders representing a wide variety of communities that really sort of as part of a stakeholder mapping exercise knocked down on the door of the Vienna waterfront to say, look, you're tenanting the space in a very traditional westernized manner. What are the barriers that exist for a small enterprise from Khayelitsha to get access to this market opportunity? Really then purposefully understanding those barriers and then breaking them down piece by piece. And it's absolutely a process. It's not something that you're going to do overnight. And I could probably share a lot more about how you buy build that buy-in from sort of the shareholder right through to your community stakeholder as well.
Shamira, yesterday one of the takeaways actually around how the circular economy in the management of waste needs to realize a paradigm shift. We live in a society where you consume a product, you consume it as quickly as possible, and then the waste gets disposed, and then you replace it and replace it and replace it, and you happen to do this in quick succession. People were saying, why aren't we buying and purchasing product and service that we keep for longer? And it instantly made me think of one of the richest men in South Africa, who I shall not name, who in 2023 still wears a pair of shoes he bought in 1968. And all he does is takes them to the shoemaker every couple of years to make sure that it's resold. Now, he was a young poor man at that point, by the way. He wasn't as rich as he is. Are we ever going to get to that point in South Africa where I look at a garment, I look at a product, and I go, this is amazing, and hopefully it has been sustainably sourced and all those elements, but I purchase it with the objective of actually keeping it for 20, 25 years before I dispose of it?
So I'll give you an example. These gold boots, they've walked, I have them for about 8 years now, and they've most certainly walked 10,000 steps because I was wearing a watch in Paris. So it is a concept of one, yes, how a product is made. And I think recent travels and just inside of us in Paris and got to look at incredible showrooms and look at the quality. And, you know, I'd often say that is not a criticism of craftsmanship and workmanship in Africa. However, it's an incredible opportunity to get to that level of it made in Italy, made in France, in terms of the quality. And also, you know, the respect that people pay when they're actually creating and making, to see them in their lab coats, wearing gloves, you know, pieces are art, and that's a very insightful thing I want to try to bring into play with regards to luxury fashion and tourism, and I've seen how they've engaged. So quality, for sure, we have an incredible opportunity to learn from elsewhere and even create better here, so that we have garments that, you know, when you say made in South Africa or made in Africa, actually means something that it will stand the test of time. It's beautiful, but backed by the fact that it's made to last. And then it's an education piece. So for example, these boots, they're made for walking, but probably not as much as I've walked in them. Because I'm not sure who you're talking about, do the very same thing. I repair my stuff because, you know, this is what I do, sustainable fashion. Before I even knew the term, I've been taking care of what I have. I have a finance background. I'm a chartered management accountant. You know, that's where I thought my skill set would lie. So yes, cost, value, those are things that are inherent in me, whether I'm an accountant or a designer. So incredible factors that we need to keep sharing real life examples of how we take care of what we have here.
So when I think of a premium made in Africa, made in South Africa product, one of the brands that comes to mind is Makosa Balado, right?
Yeah.
And I love the value process where a cooperative of women in the Eastern Cape are responsible for creating the wool that he then uses to create these garments. And every time I walk past his store at the V&A waterfront, I go, can I even afford the socks that he's selling in that store?
You probably can.
And that becomes the challenge, right? Where you go, it is better to buy. I'm a proponent and an advocate for buy one product and pay 5,000 Rand for it than buying 10 products, paying 500 Rand each for you to dispose them within a year. How do we manage that wonderful conundrum, that wonderful challenge of going, of course we want something that is premium, that is well made, because premium doesn't necessarily mean expensive, it just means well crafted, that is not going to cost an arm and a leg, that will continue providing you with opportunities to employ men and women who are part of that value chain and still be sellable but kept over a long period of time.
So, my intention is to focus purely on luxury premium fashion, because in many ways it has been sustainable, because I see the value sometimes sitting outside of South Africa, and 95% of people who buy from me sit outside of South Africa. Super high-end luxury buyers who are willing to invest in my product, but also my story and my brand. So that is the other side of it. How do you market it? How do you engage with the consumer? So yes, that is a proportion and a proponent where you don't necessarily drive value. You don't drive volume, you're driving value. But yes, if we look at our emerging middle class and people who now want to invest in brands, but they're not sure if that affordability makes sense. So it's that education piece, that marketing your story, what you actually do, but also investing in your research and development to ensure that you are pitching a premium product, not necessarily the price. If you go into any mall in Johannesburg, I went to Sandton City after years, and I saw the queues outside of these big global brands, Gucci and stuff, and I was like, oh, what's going on in here? It's like almost we have to change the mindset of African consumers and how they value African-made luxury products and brands.
Particularly when you learn where those luxury products and brands were created. Of course,
and the horrible stories sometimes behind it.
And the conditions under which those people are employed.
But it's almost you have to be successful outside of Africa before Africans want to invest in you. I'm actually kind of that little bit of that story, to be fair, where people in Cape Town don't necessarily know who I am, but I'm being invited to go to all of these places from people outside of Africa who see the value. It's a very interesting business case, I would see myself, in how I charted this kind of uncharted road, the road less traveled.
Jashila, your job, you have multiple jobs, but one of them in Tomorrow Matters Now is to helping entities and organizations explore very many of these topics we're discussing. How do you go about engaging with them on this topic?
Perfectly honest with you, as everyone went through their questions, I had multiple ideas, and I thought, don't interrupt, don't jump in.
You are most welcome to, by the way.
Okay, great. Don't have to tell me twice. So the way that I actually see it, if I now slowly go backwards, is that from the premium brand perspective, we've lost something that we used to have generations-wise. So if I look at our grandparents' generation, and so the idea behind it was that it wasn't really accessible to be able to buy these products at scale all the time. So therefore, we had a strong repair culture. What I believe is that if we couple these brands, these high-end premium brands or any brands, with a strong repair system that goes with it, quality craftsmanship. So the idea is that we're actually extending the value chain and we're keeping the resources in play for as long as we possibly can. So the idea is that the chain doesn't end at the point of purchase, that there is all of this aftercare that's associated with that. If you look at any of the premium brands that are out there, I'm going to use handbags as an example. Once upon a lifetime, I used to live in Hong Kong, and yes, there used to be lines, queues in front of the Chanel store, and when I didn't know better, I thought maybe this is a premium lunch place that people are queuing up for. But the idea behind it is that all of these brands have aftercare associated with that, to be able to actually keep those goods in play for as long as possible. If you look out there and you look at these brands and you look at the specific products behind that, what you realize is the fact that the value behind it sometimes is that I had a Chanel handbag that comes from the 1960s. And so therefore there's an extra special value associated with that. The other part that I wanted to actually mention is the fact that COVID was a great eye-opener in a bunch of different ways. And one of which is to actually look into our tourism industry, given the fact that we were all grounded and we were stuck at home. And so therefore, it started to highlight where our services existed and how our people actually offered this from multiple areas across our landscape from a social paradigm perspective. And I think that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. We had so many lessons learned out of this, and we have an opportunity to be able to tap back in there and to be able to say, how do we support this? I think that the work of organizations like the CDI, looking at taking care of business, looking at Fitola, and the list is endless in terms of supporting those kinds of innovation hubs. I think that we have an opportunity here, maybe even looking at it from a waterfront perspective, to be able to say, as much as we're looking at first-hand goods that are in the marketplace, we could be able to look at, as we have those first-hand goods, do we also have places that support those first-hand goods to live a second life, a third life, and extend the play from that perspective? At the end, it's really about building holistic ecosystems. You know, what,
and sorry, just to emphasize the point, it speaks to what Helen was reflecting on yesterday, where it's less about product, but service. So now you're not going to be populating your shelves with more Chanel bags. Perhaps just half of the store is going to be that, and then the other half is going to be an increasingly important role of actually repairing and making sure extension of that. I'll come to you just shortly.
So the idea behind it is that building out that ecosystem, because that becomes more critical than anything else. We are in a curious space at the moment. And what I mean by this is that we understand that we need things like the innovation hubs. We understand that we need spaces and technology and equipment to be able to extend this. And we have legislature for the first time that's properly speaking to this. The question is, can we now play what we are dealt in a cohesive manner? And that's the problem. Right? I'd love to sit here and tell you that it's all fabulous and we have an opportunity and it's going to be able to be amazing how we take this to the next level. What I'd like to be able to leave you with is to say we have all of these things that exist in isolated pockets, and it's our job as a collective to start syncing these together to maximize the impact behind it.
And the impossible question I'll ask you before 12 o'clock today is how we do that.
Oh yes, I'm ready. I'm ready.
Because
ask me now.
I wanna go away from this with practical, measurable elements that we can put in place.
Yeah, that was what I was trying to, I was thinking about when you were speaking about that, like, how do we incentivize this for people? Yes, of course, you're going to be able to keep what you have for longer, but I think it was in France recently where they passed a legislation where you would get subsidized if you repaired something. So the government would give you, I don't know, was it 20 euros back or something like that, if you're going to use the services of getting something repaired. Almost every seat I saw, like, little laundry, dry cleaning place, but also tailoring service. So that kind of service, but backed by legislation if you want it to happen at scale, and maybe some kind of incentivization for the consumer.
For sure.
Yeah.
Let me bring in Shirley. Shirley, thank you very much for your patience in I'm sure, being inspired by much of the conversation that is taking place here. Yours is a fascinating story. For 5 generations now, your business has been owning, your family rather, has owned the business Skyvens Corporate Fashion. Tell us a little bit about it and how it came to be realized.
I started working 25 years ago in the company of my father, which actually was company of my grandfather. So me and my brother and my husband, we took over more or less 20 years ago, and then we had this small workshop in Hilvarenbeek in the Netherlands. So we didn't use any factory in the world, but just made the clothes ourselves, like you you sure did in Africa as well. But then suddenly, I think around the year 2000, everything changes to a global system. And yeah, we had to swift with our customers. They more or less forced us to go for lower pricing. Well, you know what happened in the world. So we found new factories in Asia, in Morocco, in Turkey. And then, the first thing you bounce to is the social aspect, like the panel also talked about. Because when I first went to China or to Bangladesh, I saw really horrible things, or at least horrible, in my opinion, because I was not used to social, how do you say, poor situations like I saw in Bangladesh. So from that moment on, we decided, of course, to change because, it's my family company, and I see the people working for us in the world also as family, and I like, to at least make sure that they can do their work in a proper way. So we hired Fairware Foundation, which is in Europe, a social institute who is auditing all these factories and make sure that you can improve all the social aspects. Okay, so I think in 2015 we had almost the highest level at Fairware. So we say, okay, fine, check. And then suddenly we saw this documentary of Al Gore. I don't know if it was also broadcasted in Africa, but and then I think, oh my God, our industry is so horrible for the planet, so that I could not sleep again. So we hired an institute who was very good in technical, technical issues on yarn. And they said, okay, if you start to recycle the yarn instead of growing new cotton, instead of getting polyester out of oil, well, then you will make an amazing impact. At least not totally no waste, but at least, there's a huge step. So we said, okay, let's do that, and that was in 2016. And then all this search for the best partners started. And it was not that easy, like I tell you now, but it was an amazing, travel towards the best partners, the connecting the whole chain together, the whole value chain, because you need the customer and you need the recycler, you need the yarn spinner, you need the dye house. Everybody is involved in the circular system, and that's really amazing. Afterwards, because you get a lot of friends and you make something together. So all these years we tried to connect all the dots, and then I think in 2018 the first circular garment we made out of old uniforms. So I have just a small slide. I heard that you said a little less PowerPoint, a little more conversation. So I only took 4 slides, but maybe if Michael or somebody can put my first slide, then I'll talk you through what we did, and hopefully I can inspire you as well to start looking for your own value chain. Because what we did is following. If you look at the photos, there's in the first photo you see old garments, which we collect back from our customers. We make uniforms worn in, for example, for McDonald's. You all know McDonald's, I think. The people behind, the cashier, in the shop, in the restaurant, they wear our clothes. And after, let's say, 2 years, these clothes are more or less gone. And normally they throw it away or they burn it. But now we take back the old uniforms. We collect them and we send them back to our recycling partner, Gamma, which Helene also visited in the past. It's a big recycling plant in Turkey, and they cut and they fiberize the old uniform. So that's what you see in the top part of the photos. You see first garments being cutted. They release them from buttons, from zippers, from all things which cannot be recycled at once with the clothes, and then they fiberize back to raw material again. And we don't only use the outworn garment, but we also use polyester, recycled polyester, and we mix it together because polyester first is strong. Polyester is tending to stick the small parts of the cotton to each other, to a new wick. And also because in workwear we used to a mix of cotton and polyester because of the long-lasting part of it. So that's what you see in the upper part. So the whole recycling process, and then afterwards the wick we spin again to yarn, which you see in the down part. This yarn we buy back from the recycling plant and we send them to the supply chain, which are doing the weaving and the knitting of the fabric. And afterwards, of course, if the fabric is ready, then we send it to our factories, the sewing factory. So you see here a photo of our Turkish sewing facility, which is now our own factory. And they make new garments out of it again. And then we send these garments back to the customers. So yeah, that's a circular system. And it's very nice because yeah, everybody is involved in this system, even the customer. Next slide, please, Michael. Mm-hmm. And well, like I said, everybody is involved, and that's a very nice thing in the circular economy. I really can tell from my heart. Here you can see our value chain at Gama. Gama is the recycling factory. And yeah, I don't know if you see it very well there, but there are all kind of cultures involved. The people from Morocco, people from Turkey, from Pakistan, from India, from China. And funny because yeah, we always come together somewhere in the world one time per year, and then we share all our knowledge about sustainability, about other challenges we see together, we face together, and yeah, even Pakistan and India in macroeconomics are like enemies, but in our group they are friends, and yeah, I really like that together we think about the technical details, we think about how can we improve things. So here you see also a photo of the whole group. They're looking at dye stuff on a recycled cloth, and they are looking together how can we improve better. So yeah, so that it's even more long lasting. Like you said, it's the best thing if a garment doesn't will last forever. So every day together, creating new ideas, and also the customer is involved because it was a very funny thing. My husband, you can see on the right side of this photo with the grey curls, and he is he is at buying department. So and I am at commercial department. So my customer, I am you say how do you say my customer is my king. But for my husband nowadays, the customer is a raw material supplier. So he goes to the customer and he said, look, it's nice that Shirley is helping you in everything, but I need you to sign my code of conduct because you're not only the customer of Shirley, you're also my supplier of raw material. And if you don't give back your old uniform, I cannot make new clothes out of it. So that's a funny thing because then you really see the change of a linear system. Like we all know that the customer is the arrogant part of the chain, and it's demanding everybody in the chain to have the best price, to have the quickest delivery time, blah, blah, blah. But now you see, no, the customer is not only dictating the chain, but it's becoming a part of the circle. And if the customer does not add up to its own responsibility, then the circle will not roll as good as it could be. And then also the customer has its own negative effects of it. So you really, everybody has his responsibility then in the circle. And that's a very nice new tension in the supply chain, I would say. Next, please. I just give you all this information, blah, blah, blah. Sorry. Maybe it's too quick, then please say, because I cannot see you in Africa now, so I just... There is one thing I'd like to share with you, another slide, and it's because I heard from Natasha that you're also that there are a lot of students of design in there absent attending your seminar, and also one thing we saw in the past last years, that it's a good idea to also think about the design of a garment, because as I said before, in Turkey, the girls have to cut out all the things which cannot be recycled. So, for example, a zipper is hard to recycle, so they have to cut out the zipper first. If you make a jacket full of zippers, then it's almost impossible or not efficient to recycle. So you really need to think about every design you make. How can it be at best and at the easiest way to recycle it? And I show you 3 examples. The first example is a jacket we made for a cleaning company, and it's totally made out of polyester. So not only the outer fabric, but also the lining, the embroidery, the button, the stitching yarn, the everything which we use is polyester, and that's why you can melt it immediately, because if you melt, you have chemical recycling and you have mechanical recycling. We only do mechanical, but in the mechanical part you can do the shreddering, like I show you, but also the melting, and melting is more or less always done at polyesters. So if you melt a 100% polyester jacket, it's easy. You just put it in this plastic soup, and it's. But if you make, for example, a lining of linen, then you cannot melt it again, because then the linen is a different melting point than polyester. So think about these things. Also, the second one is a polo shirt. There is no button. It looks like a real polo shirt. They can wear it, but there's no button, so we don't need to cut off buttons. And the last one used to have a zipper, and now we replaced the zipper by a fastener made out of the same fabric as the tunic itself. So I hope that students will be inspired and talk with the recyclers what they can do and what they don't do, so that we make garments used for that they can be recycled in the end. Circular design. Oh, almost at the end of my PowerPoints, Afrika. The last one I'd like to share with you is it's more my heart. This is my family, and I love it that I can talk to you in South Africa, because I've been proposed to marriage in Cape Town. In the back here, yes. In the back here is also a photo of me and my family in Cape Town, and this is a photo you see. It's in Palabora at the Elephant River, because for me, Africa is the symbol of circularity. And maybe it's a funny thing that the girl from the Netherlands looks at it this way, because Hélène said that you are just on the beginning of circularity in your economy. But I like you to understand that for me, your nature is fully circular. If you are in the Kruger Park or the Timbaveti Reservate or whatever, that is where circularity every day happens. It's the tree which is feeding itself time and time again. So the inspiring part of nature, which we have to save, is right at your feet there. And I hope that I can come over very soon again to be able to have this Ubuntu feeling again of South Africa. So please start recycling as much as you can, and trying to remain your nature as good as it is.
Well, Shirley, we're certainly glad that Cape Town had a small part to play in your happiness, and you're most welcome here whenever you wish. Thank you very much for that. I had no clue that zippers are not recyclable at all. And I will now start thinking about that the next time I purchase a product. Rashid, at some point, the Western Cape, alongside KZN, used to be the mecca of textile production. Could something like this be replicable in a South African context?
Absolutely. I think it could be. I think the fashionistas here or in the audience can maybe add. But I absolutely think we can. I think there is a spirit here in South Africa where recycling is something that we're used to. And I think we need to there's a bit of behavior change needed in people understanding. I think firstly that product should be built to last. I think that's the first step. And then also understanding the importance of not having fast disposable fashion so that you actually can reuse it, see it as being repurposed and reused. But I think that would be a great job creation, sort of small business kind of initiative that we could institute if it's not being done already. I'm not aware of that.
Shamra, I imagine it's about a good quality product, right? And if that good quality product started as a product before and then torn apart and repurposed to become another piece of fabric, you will work with that.
So I start in the last part of the cycle with waste. So primarily everything I use is waste, either remnant end-of-roll fabric or actually scraps, cutaways. Even the thread is reused because what I create is essentially art pieces. So everything, even what comes out of my overlocker, which I managed to avoid buying for 3 years, by literally learning how to do French seams, because the quality is better and it looks nicer. The inside looks almost as good as the outside. So everything, where I started with, was the concept of using the discarded to turn it into regarded beautiful pieces that don't actually look like waste. But using, design principles and, quality, how do we sew these? How do we make them last? The value that I'm attaching to it from a price point, from an artistic point of view, but from a storytelling point of view. Those are all the things that add value to a product. And your appreciation then changes. So perhaps then you won't choose to discard the thing so easily if you understood the entire story and the concept of that garment you buy.
Is that part of the shortcoming, do you think, that we don't one, perhaps request the story as a consumer of that product, or two, the person who's selling me that product is not good enough in telling me what the story is behind the product?
So yes, what happens is when brands become big, that story becomes this corporate greenwashing kind of what you hear and sometimes goes over the head of the consumer. So when we speak of luxury and luxury fashion, it's that experience that you get, listening to the designer, the artist, the person who actually made it, tell that story. And perhaps we're not educating designers and artists or giving them that confidence to able to tell that story in their own words. But like for example, I invested nothing in my business, zero. So my idea was to take waste and turn it into something profitable. I said, well, I have the skill set. I've worked for global brands. I'm pretty sure I can do this in my house, in my own way, using nothing. So I refused any investment. I didn't even invest anything. I wanted it to happen in an organic way to prove that sometimes we always sit back and think, yeah, I can't scale because I don't have capital investment. And that doesn't always need to be the case. I'm an example of that. I have self-taught myself. I'm an accountant. I've taught myself how to sew. I've avoided investing in an overlocker, for example, because didn't want to invest in it. Let's work without having it. So sometimes yes, we need to invest in people. Yes, you might need the capital attention, but not always. We have social media at our disposal. You have the whole world as a potential customer. So if you can tell that story right, you can sell directly to the customer.
Afrika, can I add something,
Yeah,
maybe?
sure.
Of course, go ahead.
Because last February we went with our team to Morocco to see some factories, and I saw a lot of factories, but they didn't. And it was funny to hear from people who are working in the textile industry that they did not think about all these steps which we have to take before a final garment is there, And I think really it's about communication to the wearers. If they really understand how many effort and energy there is to make one T-shirt, then of course immediately the product will be more valuable itself. So I hope that also governments are making movies, like you said, social media is a very powerful platform as well. That the young generation understands to grow cotton, to pick the cotton, to make to bleach it, to dye it, to make fabric out of it, to make a garment, to put it on a boat, blah blah blah. These whole steps for just one T-shirt, it's almost undoable if you look in a factory what they have to do for just for one piece.
Absolutely, and in
Sorry,
fact,
Afrika,
yes, I'll think about this question for a second while I come to my panelists here. The global north is responsible for a lot of disposal of fashionable items, well, fashion items perhaps, that are at the end of their use to parts of Africa. South Africa is not one of those, thankfully, but it's certainly Central and Western Africa in many ways. And the question that had come up in a previous dialogue is what responsibility is there for producers and manufacturers to make sure that they're answerable not only up until the point of sale, but what happens beyond that. I mean, we alluded to it earlier, where if I do have a handbag that I purchased in 1977, that I have a place where I can go to for repairing and maintaining it, what level of responsibility should be given to you, for example, as a manufacturer, that that product that you've manufactured ultimately will not cause harm or damage, not only to the climate, but to, in many cases, communities and societies. So I'll come back to you, Shirley, on that question. You wanted to chime in.
So one of the things is that I'd like for us to take a step back. Right now, we're talking about things like recycling, and we're talking about waste generation. And I'd like to actually revisit something that you'd raised earlier on, which is reuse and repurpose, to be able to actually get the resources in play for as long as possible. And I think that if we push too hard on the recycling angle, what that means is that we're not maximizing the value of the investment of the resources into getting that product in the first place. So before we can even be talking about recycling, or before we even talk about harvesting waste and making products or any of these types of things, we need to really emphasize and focus on reuse and repurposing. I think this is really critical in the narrative itself. At the moment, the conversation, if we're not talking about textiles, if we're talking about any products, and you're talking to the average South African, they know about recycling. They're very aware that there's this thing that we have an option as far as disposing of our waste goes. And that's the problem, is the mindset is this recycling is a magical place that is going to solve all of our problems. It's not. It's simply taking our problems and shifting it to another place within the value chain if we don't have the infrastructure of new products that are going to be developed with these resources. So I think that for me, I'd like to actually take a step back and be able to focus instead on the reuse and the repurpose. And I'm pretty sure that our additional panelists online, Shirley, will talk about the legislature and what can actually be done to support that. I do want to add one additional point. As I'm sitting here, I'm looking at your dress, which is beautiful, but more specifically, I'm looking at the quality of the material itself. It's incredible. It truly is. And when I look at this, this is where no notion around recycling comes into my mind at all. I simply look at it in terms of reusing the fabric, looking at it in terms of repurposing, looking at all the various things that could be done with it. And I would like us to be able to change the narrative and not have recycling as an out.
We are, falling victim is not the word, because let's not underestimate the importance of recycling, right? It is very much an important contributor to the entire conversation that we're having. But part of the reason why recycling is so popular is because somebody was very good at selling it.
And the overconsumption piece comes into play.
Yeah.
And my point is, we can reach, people here in business, they need to read a bottom line. You can reach that bottom line in two ways. You can drive volume or you can drive value. So we don't always need to sell the story of driving volume. Do you understand? And essentially forcing people to overconsume. I said to somebody, like, I want to almost make sure there's an emotional transfer that happens when I give somebody my piece. I want to know that person is going to value it. It's going to be a legacy piece. I sometimes will avoid people I don't necessarily think they're buying the thing for the right reason. And so that comes into play what you put out there in terms of what are you trying to do. again, you should not be promoting overconsumption. Then we don't even really will come into this issue of the recycling or of that excessive waste. If you can sell it for the right reasons at the right value.
Henry, I'm going to bring you in now because
I'm going to touch specifically on the value question because I think it's a critical challenge that particularly micro enterprises across our neighborhood has faced. And I'll maybe use one small business in the watershed as an example who repurposes tires to produce the most beautiful handbags. Now, when the watershed was established, the local consumer really looked at the watershed as products from Africa, but it was overpriced. That was the one big, I can't go there because the price of the product just is way too high. They would much rather go to H&M, Woolworths, or a large producer. And very often Africa pay the same, if not more, for a similar product, whether it was shoes, and in this particular case, handbags. Right, and here was a product that was repurposed using repurposed tires to make the most beautiful products that was often a little bit more affordable than what you would go to a shop in the more established Victoria Wharf. But because we assign value in a very skewed, according to the brand that you're going to get in the Vic Wharf, her business took 6 or 7 years longer to thrive than what it actually was supposed to. Look, this was also a little bit behind the curve. This was sort of 7-8 years back, you know, when kitsch words like recycle, repurpose, reuse wasn't as popular as it is today. So there's definitely this element of consumer awareness and education that's really going to drive the demand side of things for those products to aspire to the value that they actually want to get in the marketplace.
Well, thank you for chiming in there, but you're actually trying to shy away from the difficult question I am going to ask, which I'm going to ask now. I repeat, your objective, one of the primary ones, not the only one, is to deliver to shareholders. And that is often driven by this notion of consumption and more consumption. Is there a space, not at the V&A waterfront necessarily, but in the private sector, where this conversation is taking place, where we're going, wait a minute, profit can be derived in a multiple of ways, including encouraging Africa to buy one product, one service that he'll maintain and sustain over the longevity of my life?
I think it's, particularly from a retail perspective, it's imperative. It is happening, and it's happening more often than what we would imagine. And one example of a business that actually just opened up at the V&A in the Vic Wharf is a company called Luxicity, which also they repurpose high-end luxury goods for resale in the retail environment. I think more so because consumers are demanding it. And I think the commercial imperative, what you're sort of getting down to the bottom of, is becoming more and more driven by the consumer. And the consumer does not want to procure in a manner that's going to contribute towards a degradation of the environment any longer. This is true not only in the fashion industry, it's true to the food sector, it's true to the marine industry. One example is we just recently, a big focus for us is, amongst many other things, is sustainable seafood, right? So where and how we procure our seafood. Is it coming from major industry, or are we supporting small-scale local fishers along the Western Cape? And when we surveyed some more than 1,500 consumers over the last month, 93% of them say that I want to procure more sustainably, I want to procure more ethically, I want to procure more to support a more just society. And that's not lost on the private sector, Africa. If you want to thrive as a commercial entity, the community that supports you, 60% of our market is local Cape Townians. If we aren't contributing equitably towards the environment and society, we're dead in the water. The notion that that commercial institutes are going to survive by just reaping profit, that notion's dead in the water. And you see it in graduate school of business boardroom, but you also see it in a private sector boardroom today, where corporate strategy is being driven as well.
Can I add to that?
Yes, and then I'll bring in Rashid after you.
Perfect. Because I'm pretty sure that I'm going to set it up for whatever Rashid is about to say. and that is the notion of ESG, environment, social governance. So what happens is your shareholders and your investors are looking at how profitable your business is, but not just from a bottom line perspective. They're understanding that there are these influences from a market-based principle. What are you doing from an environmental perspective to safeguard your business, looking at sustainability from a longevity perspective? What are you actually doing in terms of your carbon footprint? How are you addressing certain things? What are you doing in terms of the social paradigm, being able to look at not just the jobs that you're creating and the diversity of the jobs that you're creating, but the indirect community-related impacts that you're having? Are you being a good corporate citizen? And then finally, what are you doing from a governance, and governance includes financial perspective, to be able to say holistically, how do you then deal with yourself as an entity within the marketplace? So that's the part where economics by itself are no longer enough. Because the driver is that how do we look at things from a longer term perspective in terms of being a lot more sustainable? And I think that's really the critical point that we need to come across, is that there's all these pieces that need to fit together. Yes, we need to take the consumers on the journey. Yes, we need to make sure that they're buying these products. Yes, we need to create the awareness and the story that goes with it. But together with that, from a top line perspective, if we want investors in our businesses, if we want to be able to show that shareholder value, then we need to be able to look at our business not one-dimensionally with just the financials, and that is important without a doubt, but we need to be able to have all the other pieces that fit into that from a holistic perspective.
And in the tourism space, is that conversation happening? Because Cape Town and the Western Cape is a long-haul destination for many of our international tourists. Therefore, the carbon footprint, for example, becomes a very big question. And if I'm running an operation, I will want my rooms sold out in any given time, which means, therefore, there's a lot more of the negative contributions, if you like, towards the environment that we need to be concerned about.
I mean, I first want to respond to this issue that the ESG report, it's a bit like your recycling comment.
But it's a current, ESG is a current marker, right? And we need to be able to differentiate between what is a current marker and what is a future marker. And for the investors, they need to know what is your current stance and what are your plans then from that holistic perspective. It's that whole conversation of ESG versus sustainability. Same, but
it's
different.
Just, I mean, as someone who works in government, I've got, on the one hand, I'm trying to encourage the economy. On the other hand, I have this red tape reduction unit that's trying to cut out the red tape. For me, I don't think anybody buying a product really looks at like Zara's ESG report. And the concern for me on the focus on ESG is it's your own quite well-crafted, professionally written story that you've decided to do. I think more importantly, at a product level, at a consumer level, there needs to be more transparency and sort of traceability. That's the two issues that you normally get on food products. So you say, can I see what's in the product? Mm-hmm. We're quite used to that with food. And then the traceability element is where did it come from? So you, on the clothing brands, you more importantly, you look at the label of like how to wash it or whatever. And I think we need some space on that label for proper transparency and traceability, because I'm looking at what your artist over there is writing, and she used the word behavior change. For me, the real behavior change doesn't come from government or corporates putting in rules and regs or requiring people to do sort of fancy ESG reports. I'm just saying fancy, but rather letting the consumer decide. I think we live in a world where the real behavior change is going to happen when a consumer can sort of see that your product is so both authentic.
How do we make that shift? Let me once again paint the scenario. We live in a South Africa where more than half of our population lives below the poverty line. They have very limited resources, financial, in order to procure and acquire product and service. And you are right. If I have 50 Rand to spend, I will look for the maximum product I can buy for that 50 Rand and be perhaps less concerned about traceability of the product, where it comes from, and all of that. And yet, we fully appreciate that ultimately, if we all are responsible in our consumption, be it, let's look at product that has better quality, that has been repurposed and reimagined, be it, let me buy a product that I can actually consume for longer, as opposed to a product I'll consume only for 6 months and then I need to change it with fashion or because it's worn out, whatever the case may be. How do we effect that consumer behavior change, given those very present challenges?
Can I just, I mean, the interesting thing with tourism, it's a bit easier. You can't arrive in Cape Town and sort of consume a product made in Paris as much, because we tend to value our own heritage. People came here, and so you see an old building, and you don't just throw it down and recycle it. You fix it. You make it part of the product value. You say, this is a beautiful old building. We'll turn it into a cafe or a retail store, like at the waterfront. You're not just throwing down the old prison, you're repurposing it. So I think it's a little bit easier, even though we tend to wrap Marriott all over it or some international brands. But we need to find that balance between repurposing our culture and our heritage and having enough product quality assurance that people from abroad kind of will book it, you know. But I mean, I'm just commenting on that from a point of view of how we make sure the product, the transformation happens, if you like. That's where I think people should respect the fact that to some extent we do need some badges of approval. We need some fair trade products and be able to mark this tourism product as fair trade because it hits certain traceability standards. So
can we get to that point where that badged product is not at a premium cost? Because that often is that is the consequence, right? If you're going to expect a producer to meet all of these criteria and requirements required in order for that badge to be on that product, you're then going to pay 50 Rand more for that product than a made in China product.
I think we are reaching the point. So, for example, as government, we're going to work with fair trade and try to subsidize the ability for smaller businesses who couldn't afford the badge to actually get badged, because sometimes it's the premium that these institutions sort of have to charge, or if you want a Michelin star, the equivalent of that, it costs you a lot of money to get it. But we must try and make it easier for smaller product owners to get there.
Shamra, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and Henry, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and then I'm coming to you, Shirley, I promise.
So for example, if you want to do it at scale, and you were speaking about like food products, you know, like we have big retailers in South Africa, and you know, I don't understand why they just don't traffic light the labels. So you go, okay, is it sustainable, green light or whatever, red light for this, red light. Very simple, basic terms. And yes, you know, there's a significant population who can't afford to buy things, but we don't forget the people who have the money and who then can make different choices. And let's target them to make those responsible choices first and foremost.
Except, yesterday we had an example where somebody will badge a product and say the recyclability input in this product is X. And yet when you actually investigate, you find that it's not. So therefore, it's one thing having a badge and labeling system, but you need to have someone
the
with
regulation, a regulatory board. Yes, and that needs to happen, because you can't just say just sustainable. I mean, I see it all the time and I go, so how do you define that as being sustainable? We know we all have different metrics to decide to do that. And again, so then you need these bodies to come
but you
into
know,
play.
that's the problem. It's good to
comes
trust,
into-
but better to verify.
And as a consumer, you have the money, so you should also ask those
Ladies,
questions.
it comes into a point where, as consumers, we need to ask the question. Henry, your 30 seconds.
My 30 seconds was just sort of practical examples of how we are enabling sort of a lower barrier to access that, whether it's the certification, the badging. And if you're a seafood trader, to get MSC certified costs you thousands of rands every year. But in the food sector, packaging is a massive issue. For me to utilize other recycled, repurposed forms of packaging, the cost efficiencies just aren't there for somebody who's looking to sell pop and wors for 50 Rand, as an example. So practically what we're looking to do is concentrate that demand. You know, look at how small businesses can utilize collective demand in the entire food value chain to bring down the cost efficiencies of the products that they require, whether it's a raw product in the form of fresh produce or organic fresh produce, or the packaging that they're utilizing to drive better cost efficiencies as well.
Like we are required to bring our own coffee cups, that we can just get the coffee made in there. We're getting to a point where we bring our own plates and our own knives and our own forks, so that there is no need for all of that. Shirley, let me bring you in. So quite a bit that you have to respond on. One, The responsibility that has to be tagged onto the producer as far as producing product is concerned as to what happens beyond the point of sale. 2, legislative framework that exists perhaps in the global north, perhaps in Netherlands already, around the reuse and repurpose element of the equation as opposed to just recycling. And you can pick whatever else we've been discussing about that you want to comment on as well.
Perfect, perfect. Yes, first of all, I agree, of course, that recycling is not only the holy grail, that you should look at the total life cycle. That for me is logical. And indeed, in Holland, at least from July on, there is a new law. It's extended producer responsibility. And it's exactly what you say, that you as a producer, if you bring your garments to market, you also have to think about how can you repair them, how can you reuse them, how can you repurpose them, and in the end, how can you recycle if you really, at the last stage. And you get more or less a bonus system. All the steps you take as a producer will give you an advantage in money. So that would be a bonus for people for companies who are doing the right thing, and it will be also affecting the competition who is not so sustainable. That they have to add more money to their product to hand over to the government, who is doing new initiatives on circularity. It's kind of a difficult law, and I think a lot of companies in the Netherlands are also not really aware about what they have to do in the future. But it's just new, and I think it at least is some kind of stick with a carrot to make things better. So that's one. The other thing I like to add to the discussion is about the money for the stakeholders, for the investors. I think I have a nice practice that our company is not that big. We have more or less 20 million euro turnover, and in the end we only make a 1% net profit or something like that. Because I really agree with you that it's not about making as much money as you can as a owner, like Jeff Bezos. I think it's about sharing the value in the chain together.
Sorry, Shelley, we love the fact that a 20 million euro revenue business is not a big business. It's just in the global north, you're operating on a different level whatsoever. Because we did the conversion to the South African rand, and we went, wow, that big. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. But I mean, it's all about the profit at the bottom.
Correct.
What we do, we make also always an open cost price calculation. So just a simple T-shirt, together with the supplier, we make an open cost price calculation of every part of the T-shirt. And that I show to the customer, and I say, okay, this is the price of the total T-shirt. If you want to have recycled yarn, then it costs you that much. If you want to have, you pay for a living wage in the factory, you pay this extra, etc. And in the end, I like to add 1% of profit for my company, for all the things we have to do. So that's very honest communication with the customer, and they can choose which sustainable options they want. If they don't want a sustainable option, then they can choose the competitor. That they also know. But in the end, you see that if people get insight in pricing, then they normally they want to pay some extra, because it's not that much. It's only 5% extra on a product if you make it sustainable. So it's overcome. You can overcome this price difference, and then in the end, of course, because we don't earn that much money to operate our company, I had to go to the bank. And then the bank, they said, okay, normally we would not give you a loan because of your, of your EBITDA. But we see that you're doing so good things on sustainability and on your supply chain, that we are willing to stretch for a loan together with the European Growth Fund. These are things happening right now, at least in Europe, that is not only about the profit at the bottom, as it was in the past, but that also financial institutes are looking more to the holistic, in the holistic view of sustainability, which I think is pretty good, of course.
And thankfully, in a South African context, we're starting to see those financial products as well that are driven very much by sustainability, not instead of profit, but obviously it weighs quite significantly. I've got 15 minutes for questions. Hands up, please. Remember, be concise and direct your question to a particular person. The first question is here. If you can have a microphone, please.
God, I need to use this. Perhaps it's too Rashid in terms of legislation around retailers and the percentage of local production or local suppliers that they use, but also on, I think you also mentioned about when they check suppliers, in fact it was the other way around. When you actually check the label, it doesn't say sustainable, it says anything, but can a retailer do that? A retailer can actually, and I know I did it with one of the top tourist destinations with one of my own products, is I get a full list of, is it environmentally this, where do you get your materials, and I actually have to show proof of this before they actually take me on as a supplier. So I tick off all the boxes, but can this not be somehow, I don't know, legislated across retailers if we want to become a sustainable country?
Rashid, it was directed to you, but I imagine Henry will have some input there as well.
I mean, I think people overestimate the role that government can play. We certainly, I wish we had we had the ability to step into a mall or a retail value chain and start legislating it. Thankfully, government doesn't do a lot of that. I mean, a lot of that kind of is done at a commercial level and by businesses. I personally, as I said again, I don't think over legislation is the way to go. For me, it's trying to brand things with the right kind of consumer awareness so that people make the right choices. I still think that's the way to go, and so that your product needs to be real, it needs to be authentic, but it also needs to be beautiful. You shouldn't be buying it just because of the good cause. And that's why I come back to you, Erica, the way that you package the local crafters good so that it literally stands out and looks like the thing you really want to take home as your take-home piece. Not because you think I've got to do sort of the social right thing and buy this product because it was like made in a township or made by a local.
Which is actually an important point, because you'll be attracted to the product because of its aesthetic beauty first. And then if you have then the narrative to accompany that product, it makes it even that much more special.
And the same with food. I mean, you've got to brand your product so that it is beautiful and it's memorable, not just because I bought it because it was apparently the healthiest thing on the menu or it was the best source thing.
Now, tax money can come into play where it benefits the government, where, you know, there's a penalty and a tax associated with not being sustainable, and then some kind of benefit to those who are being. So that is something we can look at, because then you're not just leaving it to somebody to do good because it makes sense to do good, but then it's also benefit the government. So
if you can trust the government machinery, I mean,
we would have to.
We can try and tax you right at the waterfront, and then the tax goes all the way to Pretoria, and then it's your guess is as good as mine how much of that will trickle back.
The VAT refunding is another process to promote tourists, you know, when they get the VAT back, because I'd been to Galleries Lafayette, and it was incredible. So the biggest 70,000 square meter store. Can you imagine the size of that? And I got to spend time there before the store opened. So it was insightful to see those Chinese tourists lining up outside the doors before it opened, because it's a thing, and they're coming to buy thousands of euros of a suitcase. I couldn't even believe the price case on a suitcase. But here are these Chinese tourists lining up before the doors open because it's a thing to be the first one in. Because the price of the goods you purchase in France is 30% lower than, say, the exact brand was selling in China. So this is how it's boosting tourism. That store alone accounts for 20% of France's revenue revenue. I mean, France, so that's why luxury, it's a thing. It comes into play, and tourists drive that value that those brands have.
Is that regulated by government,
Yeah,
or?
so they are doing that. So we got to spend master classes with some of the biggest brands there, like massive fashion brands. And so they already have all of that coming into play, where all the way down the value chain, you'll be able to see and measure. And so the legislation is coming out, and it's coming very, very soon there. So my point is, sometimes we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Let's use what some of them are doing correctly in the West and make it work for us here.
All right.
Can I answer her
Henry?
question?
Let me bring Henry in because he works at the point of sale.
Yeah. Not physically at the point of. Just maybe two quick points, and it's a bit of jaded legislation in our country that gets put up for debate every election cycle. But because of the advent of the BBBE legislation in South Africa, we have developed an extremely mature enterprise development ecosystem in South Africa, massive innovation centers. Like we're sitting here with the Craft and Design Institute, and specifically within the legislation, the work that they've done around supply development. There's one big fashion retailer that really sort of bought into that concept, where they're trying to shift 70% of their supply chain locally. I'm sure we all know who that is. Now, I think that the legislative process is one thing. What that enables on the other side is a secondary question. Does their mindset shift to drive towards that 70% localization of their supply chain, is that going to drive profitability for them? I think is the question we're trying to answer here today. Is ultimately it's the consumer that's going to decide. If you walk into Pick n Pay, they've got the most fantastic storyboards on top of many of the aisles of their supply chain. These eggs are bought 50 kilometers away. This supplier in Woolworths, the entire good food journey. Are you going to Woolies because of the good food journey, or are you going to Woolies because the product tastes lekker? Is the question.
And the answer is both.
Hopefully both.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean,
They're mutually exclusive.
that's why I consume the products that I do, because they're both amazing products to consume, as well as the story that comes with that product suits what my value proposition is and my sort of principal standards. Will you be looking at a future where the V&A Waterfront will say, in order for you to secure tenancy on this property, you need to have 70% of your product locally sourced?
It's a continuum. It's one thing I wrote a little bit earlier. But in certain instances, we use the carrot, and in other instances, we use the stick. So a couple of years ago, very famously, our CEO made a commitment to rid our property of single-use plastics at a particular point in time. Very quickly, we had Petco and bottling companies knocking on our door to say, you can't just do that. But since we've made that commitment, we've put the carrot out there. We've said, we'll incentivize you. We'll say, if you are building into better recycling practices, if you use clear bags to separate your waste. If you're separating your waste, firstly, we'll give you a reduced price on that waste management fee. Secondly, if you use a clear bag, we'll give you another incentive on that as well. So we've implemented that carrot. We've gotten to a point where a certain proportion of tenants buys into it. We're now getting into the point where we're actually using the stick, where we are utilizing our lease agreement. We've got something phenomenal called a green lease, which does, if you're installing LED lighting in your building, you need to install a particular grade of LED light because it has to do with our energy consumption. So it's a continuum. In certain instances, yes, where you meet different tenants at their sort of journey is critical for us to understand.
So almost there. Not legislation from government, but certainly from entities. It might, yeah. You wanted to comment on that?
So there's two different parts to it. There is actually legislature that's out there at the moment. The legislature is more indirectly impacting. and that is we also have the extended producer regulations in South Africa. And we have it on certain sectors such as packaging, such as electrical and electronic appliances. There's a new one that's come out on portable batteries, et cetera, and the continuum is extending from that perspective. So what that means is that as a business, you have to be compliant with it. It means that as a producer or a brand owner or a retailer that is importing certain goods, that you are responsible for the full life cycle of your product, which means all the things that you've just described right now starts to actually come into play, right? So it's not a either or, it's simply a question of that there are all these things in the legislative environment that are creating this as an enabler, and if you're really smart as a retailer and you've seen that there are various things that need to be put into place, you start now already, especially as the sectors are extending that the regulations are looking into.
That's good. All right. We have a question. Hello.
Hello, yes.
Lovely to see you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So my comment, I think, to Shamira and to Jeshila is you said customer is king, and I absolutely agree with you. I think that regulation definitely helps, but I think the real driver is the customer. And I think what we need to look at is not so much the customer, but the actual individual, the person.
Sure.
And us as individuals, I think, or us as consumers, we've bought into this consumerism mindset over decades. And so for us to think about how we need to change that, we've got to play the long game. Because it's going to take a long time to fix that. Because, I think there are a lot of fads, how do we do sustainability, how do we buy sustainable fashion? That could be a fad. How do we turn that into a trend, into a real trajectory? And that's going to take a long time. And I think we need to look to our education system for that. We need to look at opinion leaders, and I think that's more than the social media influencers, but real opinion leaders, real icons in terms of how they do things differently. I think we've also got to understand, what does it mean? What does it mean if we want to buy something that uses less water in the production of a cotton garment, for example, as opposed to hemp? What does it mean to us? What difference does it make to my life if I have less water? And we had that during the water crisis. We very quickly forgot that. Also, what does it mean to the planet, and how do I appreciate the planet? So all of those things need to be built in over a long time, so that if I'm doing something that destroys the planet, I'm destroying myself, I'm destroying my ability to walk on the mountain, to enjoy the greenery, things like that. So I think there's lots that goes into it, and I think also if we look at, I think you spoke a lot about French consumers, French market. I think if we think about, and surely I think things, the mindset from a consumer's perspective in the Netherlands or in Europe is different to how it is in South Africa, where there's a lot we're going through. We can buy now, we're allowed to buy now, so we're going to do that. It's going to take us a while before we get to the mindset of Europe with regards to sustainability. And certainly if you go further north to Scandinavia, there's even more of a consciousness. So I think we've got to play the long game and think about all the important drivers in meeting that long game objective.
Yeah. I'm going to take that as a comment, actually, and a point of reflection, if that's okay, because I think it was wonderfully concise and compact and complete in its own, because I think everyone here agrees that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that space. I'll tell you why, because I've got two hands on the other side where there are questions. Yes. That was lovely, though. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much for this fantastic panel. My name is Ariel, and I'd like to preface my question by calling out the elephants in the room: youth unemployment and the brain drain. So rather than killing two birds with one stone, I believe in feeding two birds with one seed. So how and where can the circular economy reverse and address our brain drain and youth unemployment? Thank you.
I'll ask you that question.
Okay. So the way that it stands at the moment is the systems that we have in place. I'll allude to something that Yumna had mentioned earlier on, and that is that as we develop our value chains, we need to do this in an inclusive way. So a number of our systems are set up to be able to looking at the higher end of things, to be able to create value for larger organizations. In my opinion, the circular economy is an enabler within the green economy. And the green economy is designed to be an inclusive economy, to specifically take those factors into account. So when we design the systems and we build the approaches to make our value chain stronger, whether it is upstream and our sourcing of the raw materials and the regenerative agriculture, or if we're looking downstream and keeping our products into play as long as we possibly can with repair and refurbish, the spaces in terms of where youth can be, I would like to actually give you as a specific example that we're working on at the moment. We're currently doing a study on the repair and refurbish sector in the electrical and electronic household goods in the Western Cape. And the specific idea behind that is that we're looking at where do we create job possibilities, where do we look at upskilling specifically within that. And then we look at points of entry. We look at it in terms of creating an awareness already at a school level, being able to create opportunities at a tertiary level on colleges, etc. But we also look at things from an innovation hubs perspective. And innovation hubs could be innovative spaces, but they also could be spaces where we learn practical skills as far as upskilling goes and being able to get access to these spaces. A few months ago, I was part of a panel where we talked about exactly this point, and a lot of it is that sometimes we just don't see it. We don't see it, so we don't realize that the possibility exists for this job. And that's part of the awareness, and that's why there's a multi-pronged approach that's needed for that. We need to have it on the awareness from a school level perspective, all the way through on every level of education, including in terms of the job creation aspects that go within that.
But I think the challenge is that we're not creating enough jobs, though.
Correct.
Is
and
reality,
so therefore, as we're building out the system, that's the parts that need to be built into it.
Yeah.
So earlier on, we had the point about the, do we have legislative, etc., and I responded that we have this extended producer responsibility. And so the idea behind the extended producer responsibility is that the producer takes full responsibility. But within that, what's actually happening in reality is they're contributing financially to a scheme. And the scheme has multiple roles that they need to play. One is the collection of these goods and being able to do stuff in terms of recycling, but the other is to actually focus on things like enterprise development, creating these spaces where we have skills development, etc., to access those points.
Okay. All right. Rashid, it's your job to create the jobs.
Yeah. It's my day job, but I also have I've got young adults who are graduating, and I've got a double need to make them not feel like the only place they can find a job is outside of our country. So that both of those are very real for me. The youth unemployment and the brain drain for me is crucial. And so what government does do, and I think this is where government can step in, is to incentivize corporates to employ more young people. So I'm very happy that literally 100 million of my budget goes towards incentivizing the ability for a corporate to employ South Africans and keep some of those jobs here. We're doing that currently actually in the textile industry, where through a little bit of a government incentive, we can make the employment of more people in this textile value chain actually nowadays be literally more cost effective than taking your product to China. We've reached that point with our exchange rate and with our efficiencies where we can produce locally, but it does help when you incentivize that. And then what you said about the curriculum changes, one of our biggest programs we're doing is working with the high school level curriculums so that we make sure people are choosing the right careers that will make them more employable. We're working at that TVET, technical college level, making sure those degrees are more appropriate, and even introducing more degrees and certifications. For example, spending our energy on a solar panel installer certification, because we know there'll be a demand for thousands of those and maybe less demand for another type of degree. But once again, it comes down to getting the consumer, the actual young person, to start making the correct choice when they leave high school, to say, while I know my parents and society want me to become, I don't know, a lawyer or an accountant, I've actually got much higher chance in South Africa at being employable if I were like a data analyst, or I was a person
Or a carpenter.
Frankly, a carpenter or a plumber. You'd literally, an electrician, carpenter, or plumber is gonna be sure you'll get a job in South Africa.
Upcycler.
Whereas if you went and studied accountancy, there's a good chance we'll skill them up, and then they'll get a fantastic job somewhere else, and we'll lose. That's where the brain drain.
If you study accounting, you can start a fashion business and be.
For sure, because you need that overall global understanding.
I actually have an accounting and auditing background, and yet I'm a broadcaster in many ways.
Nothing's wasted.
I'll get to your question now. Rashid, I'm going to stress a lot more, though, because your counterparts in Gauteng, Panyaza Lesufi, advertised, I think, 8,000 jobs. Part of a government program that he announced recently. And nearly 1 million people showed up for those 8,000 jobs. There's something, I think, structurally defective, I suppose, about our economy and how we are managing it and growing it, that we... I don't have a child of my own, but I do have a 9-year-old nephew who one day wants to be an animator. And I want him to live in a country and an economy that will enable that and will enable him to animate to a point where he can actually enjoy a living of that. Now, it's not a primary need, but it is something that he must be able to enjoy. And should he get a qualification to be an animator, because you can in South Africa, we have some of the best animators in the world, unless he gets employed by Triggerfish, he's going to have to go overseas and go work out there. And some of the brain drain we're talking about here is a lot less luxurious, like animator. We're losing doctors, we're losing nurses, we're losing teachers, not because there aren't necessarily opportunities for them to be employed, but because the entire system is just going against ordinary South Africans. Load shedding, crime, taxi strike. All of that is just going, let me go and just go work somewhere else. What opportunities are there then in the circular economy and that approach that will address those things as well?
Well, so another 20% of my budget goes into driving inward investment into this country, because I think the only way we're going to grow the job creation engine here in the Western Cape is if we drive the inward investment. And I say that because it's very hard if we're just, if products in South Africa are competing with each other, that's where we're not creating new jobs. I just wanted to comment on that. In terms of the circular economy, specifically, I mean, there's an entity called GreenCape. I think you had them around, where there's a lot of investment from the city, particularly in growing those particular industries. But yeah, for me, the emphasis has got to be on growing inward investment in our country. And I think the own goals, we go from last week, having netball success and being voted as Telegraph's most attractive city to visit. And then this week, there's images going around the world of it being dangerous just to get to the airport. So we have this incredible ability to have own goals, just at the time when we're doing all the right things. So as government, all we're really trying to do is project. I think it's almost I'm reading Sapiens at the moment, and the sort of definition of the capitalist system we have, unfortunately, is what you call it, confidence in the future. And I think that's what we're trying to do in the Western Cape as our government, or as my role, is to keep creating that confidence in the future, that this is a place where you can invest, because it's only if we can attract new businesses and new investment that we can ultimately grow the pie. And that's how the new jobs are going to be created.
For sure. Shirley, we have not forgotten about your promise. Our final question from the floor.
Yeah. Thank you very much for these opportunities. I think it's great points all around. I just wanted to you say, what you mentioned is a lot of great stuff, but how visible is these things or accessible to the ordinary person, child who's studying in school, to understand that these are all the great initiatives that are available for me? In my work experience, I think a lot of people don't have a full understanding of what is actually out there and for them to do. How visible is that? We're competing with kids that are bombarded with TikTok, consumerism, And that's what they've got in their face all the time. And all the great stuff that you're doing, I think is not visible to them. And I think it's something I wanted to say we should add to. My only other question I really had is for...
You're only allowed one. Choose one that you want answered. So we can either answer that one or the one for Shirley. No, what is your question for Shirley? I'll decide which one we can answer.
Yeah. It was, I learned a lot from you. I was just wondering the conversion from garment to raw material. The company that's doing that piece, how sustainable are they? The approach that they're doing that. I really don't know, but I'm wondering, is there a lot of energy being used there to do that?
That's a more practical question to answer. So Shirley, we'll go with your question.
Yeah, it's the factory is called Gamma. You can look it up on internet if you like, but they are almost fully sustainably energized. How do you say, with solar panels and a windmill, etc., etc. So the owner of the factory is by heart very sustainable, and I think that's an important part. So because of the short answer, maybe you have time for the other question then.
While I still have you though, Shirley, for me and certainly for both Helene and Erica, what's important is that we must have something we can take away, right? They've been making furious notes and they'll come on stage in a moment to reflect. If you could advise one thing that we need to do and start putting in place tomorrow that will actually realize a difference within a year, where either in the space of textiles or even broader than that, the principles of the circular economy will, without a shadow of a doubt, benefit this country and the world. What would be that one thing?
Oh, just take the step. Just take the step. You all know everything. I heard so many good things, and if you all put it together on one pile, that's what it is. But you have to take the step and not only talk about it, but just do it. It's like easy that. And it's there is a lot of fun involved.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shirley. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Rashid, I'll go to you. Yeah. If there's one thing we could do starting tomorrow that will actually realize maximum benefit for South Africa in applying principles of circular economy in tourism, in textile, what would be that thing?
One thing, God.
Of two.
I just wish we would try to be on message as a society and as a community that we are a place. I think the frustrating thing for me is when people have the wrong perceptions about South Africa or about Africa as a place to come and invest and trade and do business. So for me, if I could do one thing, it would be to successfully be able to communicate this as a region and as a place that is safe and secure to invest in, because I know that ultimately is going to get the engine flowing to grow the economy, and that's where the jobs are going to be.
And I imagine that would be both to outside investors, outside of South Africa, who want to invest in South Africa, but also to the many owners of entities who are sitting on reserves that are not being reinvested in South Africa because, as you said, they don't trust the future of South Africa yet.
Yes, and I think the harder one is our own investments in our own country, because I think international people look at our country as a high risk but also high reward investment destination. You'll be surprised, we've had more inflows of foreign direct investment post-COVID with all of our electricity, crime, everything. We're showing upward trends of inward investment, but I think it's our own country's confidence, our own people, our young people's confidence in our own country that I'd love to see change. I'd love people to start believing in it, and that will go a long way towards people staying, bothly from a brain drain point of view, but also just living with a sense of confidence that that we're the place to be, we're the place to do business, and we should therefore want to support this place. And over lunch, you'll answer his question.
Yeah. Henry?
It's been, particularly in our circle, a bit of an overused word, but it's something that was mentioned a little bit earlier about the support ecosystem. And I think I don't think we ever really can overemphasize the importance of a support ecosystem, because, in amongst every one of the stakeholders, the role players that's sitting on the stage and in this room, we all play a role in that value chain that we've been speaking about today. And the more we're able to learn and share and particularly showcase the pockets of brilliance where there are examples of where we're getting it right, learn from those prototypes and then scale and get the right level of investment, I think we'd go a long way further than where we're at. And I totally agree with Rashid's sentiments. I know that I operate in a little bubble, and that bubble is in a bubble of Cape Town, and that Cape Town bubble is in the bubble of the Western Cape. We're sitting in a very fortunate position in this province where we can showcase those pockets of brilliance if we just leverage the ecosystem that's around us just a little bit better. And particularly on the consumer side of things, we need to drive consumer sentiment and demand.
Thank you. Shamra?
I would say it's to be a walking, talking billboard of your values. And if that is sustainability, it doesn't matter whether it's in fashion or all around it. I mean, I've had this collection that I showcased at Cape Town Fashion Week, which I had 2 weeks to do. No electricity, and everything I did was by hand by myself. But, and I said to them, I'll only do the show if you let me show it twice. They said, no one shows one collection twice. I said, no, that's the only thing. You're going to have to do it. So I showcased twice. And some people had watched it both days, and they said to me, I wish you could show it a third day. I wish I had more time with that piece. And I got this idea in my head that who cares? The fashion calendar has dictated how we purchase. I'm going to turn it on its head. Where can I take this to? So that collection has now been, the very same collection has been to somewhere like Paternoster. And then it's gone on to Paris, because I had this in my heart, it should go into Paris. And guess what? Someone calls me, it's going to Paris. It's gone to Colorado, and this I'm talking about in the last 6 months. It's gone to Colorado, and then I said to my dad last week, it would be kind of cool. We went to Europe, we've been in Africa, it's been in America. How about Asia? And guess what? It's going to Asia. And we speak about tourists coming in. I would urge you to go out if you can, and you have these opportunities to share the joy and the good news about Africa. Trust me, our products are good enough, but our stories are more than enough. The world is ready, and they are ready to invest in Africans, our stories and our brands. We need to work together and not in silos to develop these opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Jashila, your final word.
I think a little bit of everything that you've heard so far, the breaking down the silos in particular. We have a lot going on, but it's hidden away. And we need an opportunity to shine a light. Create that transparency and let that be the inspiration that it is. That in itself is something that we can be able to scale. A lot of times we think that the answers lie across our borders, somewhere else, etc. But we already have a lot in place. We need a chance to be able to create that transparency, share with one another, work in that ecosystem, but most importantly, to break down the silos. That, for me, is really the critical point.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. A round of applause, please, for our panel. Today, I think you will all agree it has been a fascinating conversation. Before I bring Erica and Helene up for their reflections, let's go to Joy, who's had the... Joy, right? Not Judy. Judy. Sonia, sorry.
Should we?
Yep, I think we can.
Should we go down?
Askis.
I can feel joy. It's all good.
Oh, good, fantastic. It's because it's such a joyful picture that you've reflected there for us. For those who don't know, who weren't here yesterday, the graphic harvesting has been happening since yesterday, and Sonia is now going to take us through what came out of today. And please take the time to either take a video or a picture of what she has depicted. Over to you, Sonia.
Cool, thanks, Afrika. So yeah, day one yesterday happened all here on the left-hand side, and I continued here on the right. So we needed to include some of the reflections from yesterday, which was just around South Africa can really leapfrog into circularity. So I needed to draw a frog. then looking at sustainable fashion and sustainable tourism, sort of pieces that straddle both are, this really involves whole value chains. So we need a deep dive into, we need to really understand, and then re-engineer to create this catalytic impact. And so re-engineering can really involve, how do we create shared value? There are often trade-offs, but we're going to look at how can we create value for many, many stakeholders in that process. The definition around sustainability, it needs to kind of encompass environment, economic, social. When those overlap, we start to get towards sustainability. Then moving in towards the sustainable fashion piece. So here, there are lots of elements around really starting with quality craftsmanship, creating awareness around consumers, buy to keep, building a repair culture. We want value, not volume, so changing this consumerism mindset. And also around African brands, so starting to really appreciate and value our locally made brands. And then creating incentives, so incentives to repair, also incentives for larger companies to produce value as opposed to volume. Here we've got, if we are looking at recycling, and kind of above here I've written refill, reuse, repair, and then in brackets as a last resort, we recycle. So when we are looking at recycling, really design a product from the beginning to be able to be recycled downstream. Then there's this idea of taking something that's, taking things from being discarded to regarded. And so we can do that again by using our artistry and our storytelling. How do we amplify things through the words we use, how we communicate? There's so much on here today. So dense. Consumers hold a huge amount of power. They want ethical products, so we can really, again, it's the consumer education piece, it's the behavior change piece. There was discussions around how do we create affordable badges of approval, transparency, traceability, how do we use the carrot and stick approach with retailers and consumers. A big piece around consumer education. So again, how do we, things sell because they're ethical, but also because they're beautiful and they have quality. And again, creating more of awareness around that. The big piece around the youth employment, around, again, government incentives, changing our curriculum in our education, embedding and creating and highlighting opportunities within the value chains and in the circularity value chains. This is about playing the long game. And then here the last piece is about investing in South Africa, inward investment, investing in our own country so we can build our confidence. We've got great stuff to share afterwards.
Thank you very much, Sonia. That is absolutely amazing. A round of applause, please, for Sonia. And you can find her by going to graphicharvest.co.za. All of that work is 4 hours of conversation, beautifully depicted in one image. So please, I invite you to take pictures and videos of that. Is Jackie May here by any chance? No, okay. In a moment, I'll be telling you about an Africa Textiles Talks that will be happening on the 17th of August at the V&A Waterfront at Workshop 17. But first, let me get the reflections of both Erica and Helene on what has been a very involved 2 hours. I mean, I knew it was going to be busy. I had no idea that so much of it was going to come out of it. What were some of your takeaways?
Well, the zippers.
I know, exactly.
All jokes aside, thank you so much, all panel participants, for your insights. I said it beforehand, and I still believe it in both in tourism and textile. There's a lot already happening, and I think to use Shirley's words, just to continue to do it. And in tourism, perhaps the advantage is that the consumers are more affluent. So you can in tourism you can really perhaps also lead the way there, and in textile. There is a lot possible in reuse, refurbish, but also recycle. And there, for me, the key point was also sustainable design. I think that is what Shirley said. if you have in your fashion the sustainability of design, you can really try to use it as long as possible, but if you cannot use it anymore, it is much easier to recycle and make it of good use again. So that was, for me, a very important point.
Absolutely. Erica, you in the work of Craft and Design Institute, it's all about what we were talking about today, wasn't it?
Is it on?
I think so.
Yes. It's just my voice that's low.
Perhaps.
I think it's kind of overwhelming, the discussion, because there are so many touch points and so many places where we think we can act or we need to act. But I think it kind of all keeps coming back to me, and I think this is you're probably tired of this point that I keep making, Africa, is that actually it's about it's the individual. It keeps coming back to the consumer and the citizen and us as kind of people who inhabit the planet. Because even if even consumers are shareholders, consumers are designers, they're not just consumers. So we interact constantly in this world that we have created. So the most important thing for me, really, it keeps coming back to, is how are we educating people? How are we informing people from school all the way through to kind of university to now, to how we live our daily lives? And I also think about in terms of the sort of mass consumption, is we are up against the marketing. Yumna spoke about the long game, but you're trying to change behavior. We are up against the marketing of big companies, big corporates who are encouraging consumption, because the system is built around constant consumption. So to change that system requires changing our behavior and our perception about value. So it sort of feels like a really, really big challenge, but I think the way we start is by starting. For us as CDI, what I'm sort of taking away is how we can do it as the Institute, and how we can build the consciousness amongst the members of the CDI, so that the businesses who are making products are also starting to think from a circular point of view.
Yeah, no, I like that. We will have master classes, workshops starting in 2 hours' time for those who are here at the D-School Africa. But many will be asking what happens next. What happens after the conclusion of the festival this year? Because we've been given so much to think about. We've been given so much to be inspired by, and we've been given so much to question, I suppose, the manner and the way that we live our lives and we produce and consume. But what happens next now?
Well, this year we didn't have as much time to organize the co-create the whole process. We finished it earlier, and last year we ended the festival with some demonstrations of challenges that were put out, that students, that was in the water sector, that students worked on. And in my mind, what I could see is that we continue the conversation on circular economy, but then also bring it more into a demonstration space. So for students to work on it, for entrepreneurs to show what they are doing, to really start, as this gentleman was pointing out, to make it visible.
Yeah.
And to give people ideas from what is already out there. And that would be my hope, that we can continue that way.
Stunning. And by the way, both your questions were very valuable. I just needed to pick one, and I just chose one. Erica, you're obviously in full agreement of that. And I imagine we need to farm from the community as well what shape the idea that Helene is leaving us with here takes, right?
Yeah, so I would love to see us initiate a process coming out of this Co-Create Design Festival, giving ourselves a 12-month runway to next year to actually put out a challenge to the many thousands of businesses who are CDI members around how do you address the question of circularity in your business? How do you rethink your business model? How are you thinking about the products and your product life cycle? I think they're great opportunities, just the idea of reusing, of fixing, of repurposing. If I think a lot of the members of CDI, if I think about someone who's sitting in the audience, and I'm looking at one of them right now, like, what is the life cycle of your product? This idea of taking products back and repairing them, repurposing them, so that it's not just about a single use product or a single sale. It's about the relationship with the person who's buying my product. So I would love us to put that out as a challenge and see what comes up. How can we facilitate a process and see what we have in 12 months' time in terms of people rethinking their businesses?
And of course, service, because that's what came out strongly yesterday, wasn't it? That instead of just being a pusher of product, consider being a pusher of service as well.
Oh yes, and I think that is already happening in many organizations or in many communities. But yes, if we can demonstrate some of those examples as well, that then it becomes alive, and that is, I think, at the end, what is important.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you. You are great supporters of this process, and every year I leave invigorated, inspired, and rejuvenated as to what is possible, because it's all about the opportunities. Thank you very much.
And if I may, I would like to have a big hand of applause for Afrika Melani for, again, even after 20 years, you are still inspiring as ever. Thank you so much, Melanie.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And we should, of course, say thank you very much not only to the Kingdom of the Netherlands, but also the Craft and Design Institute, other partners who have made this year's Co-Create Design Festival and the dialogues before that possible, the City of Cape Town, GreenCape, and the Circular South Africa. We also have to say a big thank you to the Hasso Plattner School of Design Thinking Africa, which has been our accommodation and really inspiration for this year. This marks the conclusion of the hashtag Co-Create Design Festival for 2023, but please don't see this as the end. It's almost a beginning of a process of this 12-month runway that we are going to be embarking on what shape next year's festival that will come actually will, well, what is the challenge? What are the prototypes being developed? What are the design-led solutions that we can come with to some of those challenges? And, because there's always more, we invite you to join Afrika Textile Talks. It's going to be a full day of connecting and learning about textiles, slow fashion, as well as design. The program celebrates and supports a growing African textile ecosystem that acts with care for people as well as the planet. And there's an incredible lineup of speakers. You can also expect an expo of swatches and raw fibers from across the continent for you to see new and old textile making techniques. The event brings an opportunity to network, to be inspired, and to learn about the latest in textile news from subject experts. As indicated earlier, it's a one-day event. It's happening on the 17th of August, 2023, at Workshop 17 at the V&A Waterfront, and it is hosted by Twig and Emolia Collective. For more information, you can go to twig.co.za, that's twig.co.za. Otherwise, have a wonderful, wonderful Tuesday, and of course, a very happy Women's Day in South Africa for tomorrow, and I look forward to hearing and seeing your inspirations. Thank you very much, everyone.